You cannot stress your way into health. You cannot shame or obsess your way into wellness. So when I say you can't heal a body you hate, it's really realizing that unless there's a grace and a lightness to what you're doing, it's going to probably be short-lived. It's not going to be sustainable. And even if it is sustainable, it's going to be such a source of dread and anxiety and misery that you're gonna really not have a good quality of life. So there has to be a paradigm shift, in my opinion, when it comes to sustainable wellness.
These bad dads make it hurt.
When we think about most conditions today, whether it's diabetes, digestive issues, or even depression, a couple of things stand out in common. One, to a large extent, they're treated with conventional medication, which in some cases fails to address the root cause of the illness itself. Second is they all have an inflammatory component to them. Inflammation is a word that's thrown around so much these days, but what is it? Today we have the author of The Inflammation Spectrum and a wonderful book called Ketotarian. He's someone I've looked up for a very long time. I've looked up to him since I started my own professional journey. He's one of the best integrative and functional medical doctors. Dr. Will, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, my friend. I'm honored to be a part of this conversation, and thank you for the kind words as well.
Absolutely. Doctor, let's just jump right into it. Functional medicine is all about addressing the root cause of a disease, which seems so important. Because I've always wondered, how do you treat an illness if you don't know what's causing it? So what has your journey been like, and what drew you towards functional medicine?
Yes, it's definitely, functional medicine is my heart and my passion and my joy as well. I graduated from Southern California University of Health Sciences in Los Angeles in the States, and my postdoctorate education and training is in functional medicine and clinical nutrition. And I have always been fascinated, not just on a clinical level, but on a personal level, about health. That predates me being formally trained in this field. So I grew up the weird kid eating organic foods and always wanting to learn more about the science of nutrition and the health benefits of certain things in life when it comes to food and lifestyle practices. And then that's what really propelled me to want to be formally trained in this field of functional medicine. And then I graduated from school, and I was in Los Angeles, but I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I went back home, and I started to write about functional medicine, write about health benefits a long time ago. But before, when there wasn't like a functional medicine centers and hospitals, there wasn't a big conversation about functional medicine back then. But so there'd be people in different cities and states and countries around the world that were interested in this field of healthcare that I was writing about. So we were one of the first telehealth clinics in the world. Over 12 years, we've been doing webcam consultations for people. That's all I've done. I've never really had, we have a brick and mortar clinic, but most people are online. Sometimes people fly in or drive in for an initial consultation, obviously pre-COVID, but now it really serves us to be there for people that are isolated, that are going through these health issues, that maybe can't have access to someone in functional medicine. So that's always been my main focus. 10-hour days, I'm here at the clinic and we're consulting people online, and we drop ship labs to them and really want to give them a functional medicine perspective, a thoughtful insight, and thoughtful tools to really reclaim their health. So the people that I spend most of my time with are people with autoimmune conditions, which, as you know, but for people that don't know, there's millions of people around the world that have an autoimmune condition. It's of epidemic, pandemic proportions, really. If you look at the amount of numbers, it's pretty staggering. And millions more are somewhere on this autoimmune inflammation spectrum that I write about in the book, where they're not necessarily diagnosable, but they are they have autoimmune components to their problems. They are in a state of autoimmune reactivity, meaning they are having autoimmune flares, but they're not fitting mainstream medicine's criteria to be labeled officially with a diagnosis code and labeled with an autoimmune disease. But research estimates it's about 4 to 10 years prior to someone's diagnosis, meaning 4 to 10 years before they were diagnosed, things were brewing on this autoimmune inflammation spectrum. So it's my passion to really empower people with this information, because you have to know what you're up against to do something about it. You have to actually address the issue head on and give it the time and the due diligence that it deserves to start to reclaiming your health, because these are largely supportable, improvable, reversible, overcomable things. They're not quick fix issues, certainly, and there's exceptions to what I just said, but the majority of people wield a lot of influence on their health with functional medicine.
Dr. Cole, that's so interesting that inflammation is a telltale sign of what could happen a couple of years later. But initially, we used to speak about inflammation with regard to pain, swelling, or even redness, which was more tangible. Now it seems to be this hidden entity. So, at its very essence, what would you say inflammation is, and how is it caused?
So inflammation is not inherently bad, right? It's a product of our immune system. It's actually a wondrous part of our immune system in balance. So in balance, inflammation fights viruses, fights off bacteria, it heals wounds, it heals our body, it protects our body from foreign invaders. It's a wonderful part of human physiology, and we would not be here as a human race without healthy, balanced, measured inflammation levels. The problem is when inflammation is thrown out of balance. That's the problem. It's the forest fire that's burning in perpetuity. That's the issue. And it's homeostasis, or what I call the Goldilocks principle. Not too high, not too low, but just right. Inflammation has to be just right when we need it. It should come up in states of infection or something like that. You want inflammation levels to come up. But then homeostasis, the Goldilocks principle, you want inflammation to calm down when that foreign invader is gone. When chronic inflammation arises, there is a breaking of the Goldilocks law. There is a loss of homeostasis in the body, and it is that is a problem. It is a lack of balance, and that is across all traditional medicines. If you look at Ayurvedic medicine or traditional Chinese medicine or medicine, Native American medicine, it's a lot of it has to do with bringing about balance in the body. And there's different modalities and tools to do that, but that's the principle of balance. And that's what functional medicine is really bringing, I think, to the 21st century, really the best of alternative health, which is getting to the root cause and bringing about balance. But it's what's the research show, and how can we really understand the mechanisms at play, which is the best of conventional medicine, which is being evidence-based. It's running labs, it's getting data and tracking that data objectively, so we can run labs and look at inflammation markers, for example, like high sensitivity C-reactive protein, and see that quantifiably come down, which is really a reflection of the person bringing about balance in their body. And then so on and so forth. There's a lot of different biomarkers we can measure to quantify that objectively. So inflammation is, so you're right, that word can be thrown around quite flippantly, but inflammation is not inherently bad. When we say inflammation in the context of this conversation, typically what we're referring to is chronic inflammation or inflammation out of balance. And that is what's linked to just about every health problem under the sun. I mean, from autoimmune conditions to anxiety, depression to diabetes, heart disease, the list goes on and on and on. It is really the underlying commonality between just about every health problem there is.
Absolutely. Dr. Cole, I know you mentioned anxiety and how inflammation can cause it, but does the reverse also hold true, where trauma, self-sabotage, and even stress can worsen inflammation?
Absolutely. It's a great point. So this is the interconnectedness of the body, and we in the West and around the world, Western thinking, I should say, we like to separate mental health from physical health. Our brain is somehow this separate thing, and it's just a mental health problem and a physical health problem. But the reality is, mental health is physical health. Our brain is part of our body, and to somehow compartmentalize mental health as a separate entity is an incomplete and outdated perspective, I think, on how the brain works. The old thought was that the brain was immune privileged, is what the research referred to it as, that there was no immune component to the brain, and that inflammation wasn't an issue when it comes to the brain. But now we know that's not the truth, that there is an immune system of the brain with different glial cells, and specific microglial cells can be imbalanced, an important part of the brain's immune system. It's like a housekeeper cleaning up the brain and cleaning it up, autophagy pathways, etc. But then the opposite, when it's out of balance, it is an assassin. It really attacks neurons. It's linked to neuroinflammation, which is associated with things like anxiety and depression and fatigue and brain fog and neurological autoimmune issues like MS and Parkinson's, etc. But to your point, there is a bidirectional relationship between thoughts and emotions and our physiology, because our physiology, meaning if we have inflammation or things that are causing dysregulation physiologically in the body, that will impact your thoughts and emotions, meaning that you will feel more stressed and anxious and wired and maybe tired. You'll feel these things because of the physiological imbalance or the chronic inflammation, etc., and the things that are driving that chronic inflammation. But the converse is true as well, meaning that if someone's going through trauma or stress or a toxic relationship, or they have mental emotional stress, that mental emotional issues will impact physiology. So absolutely, it is two sides of a coin. They are bidirectional in their relationship, and both need to be addressed. The external life of somebody, meaning their work, their job, their family relationships, their social connection, all of these things need to be dealt with. Healing trauma has to be dealt with, because all of these things are linked to raising inflammation, messing up your hormones, triggering autoimmune issues, triggering mental health problems, etc. So yeah, both are important, because the converse is true as well.
Certainly. Dr. Cole, speaking of healing, something you have said has always stuck with me, which is you can't heal a body that you hate. I would love for you to elaborate on that.
It's such a core ethos of what I do with consulting patients online, because sometimes there's a duality of functional medicine. There's the science and the art. And sometimes, I love science and it's a major part of functional medicine, but sometimes people, even in functional medicine, but very much so in conventional medicine, they can get so caught up in the science of it. And in the wellness world, they can get so caught up in the nutrition science, if you will, where it's avoiding these foods because of X, Y, and Z. It's eating these foods because of X, Y, and Z. It's working out more because of this, does all of these health benefits. And it's so caught up in the mechanical side of things when it comes to health, that we can really divorce ourselves from the core of what I believe to be sustainable wellness, is that you cannot stress your way into health. You cannot shame or obsess your way into wellness. So when I say you can't heal a body you hate, it's really realizing that unless there's a grace and a lightness to what you're doing, it's going to probably be short-lived. It's not going to be sustainable. And even if it is sustainable, it's going to be such a source of dread and anxiety and misery that you're going to really not have a good quality of life. So there has to be a paradigm shift, in my opinion, when it comes to sustainable wellness. So what am I saying about this? It's that food change, or that herbal medicine protocol, or that physical activity, or whatever wellness tool you're talking about. The consciousness or the intention, that what's fueling that has to be coming from a place of, wow, I love my body enough to feed it good things. I love my body enough to avoid things that make me not feel good. I love I love feeling great more than I miss those foods that make me not feel good. So this is not this restrictive, arduous thing where, oh my gosh, I can't have all this stuff. It's so punitive. It is really such a sense of delight and a sense of self-respect, and really using self-care as a form of self-respect and really valuing yourself so much. So the analogy that I use in the inflammation spectrum is, if we saw ourselves as an expensive car, I think I used the example Tesla in the book, but whatever expensive car you're talking about, how do those people treat their car and fuel it or charge it and wash it and tend to that car? How do they park it in the parking lot versus the person that sees themselves as an old beat up junker car that's like a throwaway? They are going to treat their car completely different. Many people see themselves as an old used car and don't realize that they were born and created a Tesla. And that impacts everything. You will eat out of self-respect. You'll move out of self-respect. You will do things out of self-respect. And that's the paradigm shift that people have to see. And that's really the ethos that I teach my patients and what I talk about in the books, because I found it to be so important to people to remember that.
That's so well said, Dr. Cole. I think it's so essential to eat with love, move with love, and do everything that you do with love. Because in this 21st century, I think this word hustle has come in, which means that we just need to burn our bodies to the ground to look, move, and feel better. And that's far from the truth. And I think that's particularly important in the case of hormonal imbalance, given how sensitive it is. And today, conditions of PCOS and thyroid and adrenal fatigue are just all over the place. So how can someone suffering from any of these hormonal issues, I know you talk about these a lot, break this cycle of inflammation, hormonal imbalance, worsen inflammation, and the cyclical loop to feel better?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why I wrote The Inflammation Spectrum. That book is really born out of my clinical experience and consulting patients online. And it is disillusioning because there's so much conflicting information online. It is overwhelming to get clear like what's right for me, and because you can really substantiate anything by a click of a button, and you can find studies to prove that you're right if you have an agenda, and you can use studies against people. And it's really, to me, it's like, yes, use the science, look at the best data we have, but then what's right for you in real life? What just makes you feel good? What improves your labs? That's what I'm concerned with. So yeah, we look at the data, we look at the studies. This is always evolving. We want to be evidence-based, but we realize that we also have to use real life as a lab, and we have to be our own N of one experiment in many ways. And that's what we have to quantifiably see the lab data moving in the right direction. We have to see their quality of life improve in the right direction. That's my primary concern. So I don't get too caught up in pontificating studies overly when it comes down to my day job is talking to real people and getting them healthy. And if we see the labs improve, if we see their quality of life improve, we're moving in the right direction. So that is what my main focus is. So for somebody that's out there that's disillusioned and going through these problems, how to break that cycle? A few things. One, you could find a functional medicine doctor, I think, to really find out what's the pieces to your puzzle. I mean, we see people around the world. It definitely is an option. We offer free health evaluations for people if they want to see if we could be there for them and get them labs, et cetera, and point them in the right direction. Functionalmedicine.org is another great resource as well, which is the Institute for Functional Medicine, if you want to find someone locally and not via telehealth. And then I think books are a great resource too, because they're low cost, they're effective, and the book's published by publishers. It's not like my book. I wrote the book, but it's out there in the world. Penguin Random House published it, and it's just a good resource because I really put my heart and soul in the research behind it and the practical application of it, and I walk people through a process of what I do clinically. So the quiz in the book, in the inflammation spectrum, is just, I redid what I talk to patients about. So I made it user-friendly so they can walk through a functional medicine approach to inflammation and hormonal balance and autoimmunity and digestive problems and fatigue issues. They can go through the 7 main sections of the inflammation spectrum, which is the gut and the brain and hormones and detoxification and musculoskeletal system. And I don't know what else I mentioned, blood sugar regulatory system, autoimmunity as a separate entity, and then what I call polyinflammation, or the inflammation in more than one area. And then from there, they get their own specific food protocol and toolbox with different practices and natural medicine protocols to follow. So that's, I think, a good resource if someone doesn't want a functional medicine doctor, or maybe isn't ready for that, maybe thinks they don't need that. I think the book will be a really good direction to action steps they can do in their life that are reasonable, that are effective, and quantifiable as well. So you'll be able to see in the quiz, they can retest their quiz score after they go through, and you'll see the quiz come down, and that's meaning you're feeling better and you're moving in the right direction, at least from the quiz standpoint. So those are some starting points that I think people can do to start to break that cycle of inflammation.
Dr. Cole, I've read the inflammation spectrum, and it really breaks clinical information down into bite-sized digestible pieces for the average consumer. Because I think very often when practitioners talk, we think that an average consumer would understand our jargon. But I really appreciate that in the book, anyone can understand it and heal themselves with a very basic resource. But jumping onto your other book, which is Ketotarian, you talk about the mostly plant-based diet to burn fat, boost energy, and crush cravings. What is your opinion on the ketogenic diet, or even intermittent fasting for that matter, since they often are spoken about together?
Yeah, so they're really part of the same conversation, and they are very much, they're amazing tools to use. And I'm not concerned with pop culture fads and, trends, really. I mean, I'm happy when healthy things are a fad because it means it's helping people's lives and more people are aware of it, and it's raising awareness. That's a good thing. But I don't need that to know that this is making changes in people's lives, because I see it 10 hours a day. So these are tools that you can use. But the goal of it is to use it for what works for your body. So the way that I advocate in Ketotarian, which is my first book, it's my made up word of a mostly plant-based, clean ketogenic diet. We talk about intermittent fasting in that book as well. And lots of amazing, exciting science and practical application stuff and how to do it. What does dirty keto look like? How to avoid that? And how does the conventional ketogenic diet get it wrong a lot of times, because they are hyper-focused on macronutrients, proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. And I advocate for most humans to do a variable, cyclical ketotarian approach, which is what I advocate, which you're in ketosis, high fat, moderate protein, low carbohydrate diet, mostly plant-based, clean ketogenic diet for 3 to 5 days of the week, and then you moderate your carbs the remaining days of the week. So that equates to be about less than 55 grams of carbohydrates on the keto days to 75 to 150 grams of clean carbohydrates on the carb up days, the clean carb up days. So that creates great microbiome diversity, detoxification, healthy fibers, not fearing healthy foods like fruits and even things like rice and sweet potatoes and starches and things like that. There's a time and the place, back to balance. We want homeostasis. So we're using the tool of ketosis and intermittent fasting to create metabolic flexibility. So to burn fat for fuel and burn sugar for fuel. Most people around the world today are always stuck in this sugar burning mode. They are hangry and irritable and fatigued and inflammation and they have diabetes and metabolic issues and weight loss resistance, all this stuff. This is largely due to inflammation, like I mentioned, but inflammation creates metabolic inflexibility or metabolic rigidity. They're always in the sugar burning mode. And it's like the analogy that I use in the book is like burning kindling on the fire. Kindling will light up, but it's short-lived. So you need to put kindling on 6 times a day to maintain that flame. But the alternative is burning fat for fuel. It's like a log on the fire, firewood. It will burn longer, it'll burn slower, it'll be more sustainable source of flame or energy or metabolic fire. So this is definitely what I want people to tap into. But there's a time and place. Sometimes you need kindling on the fire, and that's what a cyclical ketotarian approach does. So that's what Ketotarian is. It's like over 80 recipes, and they're vegan keto, vegetarian keto, and pescatarian keto, wild caught fish, fresh seafood, but they're all clean ketogenic ways of eating. And I actually haven't said this yet on a podcast, but I just got the go ahead from the publishers, so I guess you will be the first one that I've said it to. The end of February 2021, my 3rd book's coming out, and it's really a deep dive into fasting. So I am so excited about that. It's sort of a part 2 of Ketotarian, tons of recipes in that too, more Ketotarian recipes, but it's more of that cyclical approach that I wanted to have a deep dive conversation in. And it's really about intermittent fasting because it's really part of the same story. The more fasting somebody does, the more they're producing ketones, which is a signaling molecule to lower inflammation. Ketogenic diet's not just about losing weight. It is an anti-inflammatory, it's an epigenetic modulator, meaning it lowers inflammation in the brain and throughout the body, and upregulates pro-antioxidant pathways like the NRF2 pathway and AMPK pathway. And it increases autophagy or cellular recycling, which is quite paramount in our day and age with so much metabolic issues and accelerated aging problems. So it's the book is called Intuitive Fasting, and I've been working on it for the past year or two, and it's really going to be an exciting book when it comes out.
Congratulations, Dr. Cole. That's so exciting, and I really can't wait to read the book. And I think you mentioned veganism, and as far as I know, you've mentioned in the past about how you followed the vegan diet for some time, and then you eventually migrated away from it. Why was that, and what are some common mistakes most vegetarians and vegans make when it comes to their diet?
Well, I think vegans and vegetarians, and I was vegan for 10 years and then evolved to a ketotarian way of eating, still mostly plant-based, but metabolically flexible way of eating. And it is most vegans and vegetarians, they hyper-focus on just because it's vegan and vegetarian that they're equating that with healthy. That's not the case. I mean, and that's the same way it goes with keto. Just because something's keto doesn't mean it's healthy. So it's looking at the quality of food, not just the type of food that it is. And also depending a lot on grains and a lot on legumes as your base of caloric intake can work okay for some people. It's not, I wouldn't say it's optimal for anybody, but it's definitely doable for some people. But a lot of people, it's going to do a number on their microbiome and their inflammation levels. It's just too much grain, lectin proteins. Mainly, it's the proteins, the grain proteins and the bean proteins. Because of the rate of autoimmunity, it's kind of stressing out an already stressed out system. I wouldn't blame just the grains and legumes by themselves, but it's already, the body's already stressed out as a general rule. The rate of chronic inflammatory problems are so great. A lot of people have really impaired gut health, and then they're eating foods that aren't easy to digest, and it becomes very arduous for the gastrointestinal system to really work well. And the gut's always working, trying to break down these foods that aren't the easiest to break down. And the bioavailability of nutrients are really low to begin with, let alone when someone has an impaired gastrointestinal system and maybe genetic polymorphisms where their nutrient density and bioavailability of nutrients is quite low. So certainly, as I mentioned in the book, you can be entirely vegan keto. Most of the recipes in Ketotarian are vegan keto. So I'm not an anti-vegan, but I feel like there should be some flexibility there, and I think we should work on nutrient density as well. Of course, vegetarian opens up more options, vegetarian keto, and even more so pescatarian keto with the wild caught fish that gives even more ample long chain omega fats and fat soluble vitamins, etc., in the form of those foods. So that's what Ketotarian is. If someone wants to be completely vegan keto, they have that option in the book, but definitely I want to bring about these bioavailability component issues as far as B vitamins and fat soluble vitamins and iron, that you can really change the game for your physiology when you start using food as medicine and getting that medicine in bioavailable forms. Now, we live in such a wonderfully convenient time where we could supplement our way with when you're eating a strict vegan diet, and that's possible. But the question that I pose in the book is, if you can't get it in bioavailable ample amounts from food, is it the right thing for you long term? Again, it's working for some people. Keep doing what you're doing. I'm talking to all the people that it's not working for, and how can we optimize it for you?
Absolutely. Dr. Cole, I agree with you that I think very often you can't supplement or run your way out of a crappy diet. And at the end of the day, if you can get your nutrients from food, why rely on supplements? But at the end of the day, to each their own. So I think you've provided such a unique perspective on both the keto diet and the vegan diet. We know that we can have an amalgamation of both, but most people think that they're warring diets. So how does someone choose what's best for them?
I think the best way to see is to really experiment and keep an open mind and open heart to these things. Sometimes people get so stuck in these food tribal wars, and they get so stuck in their tribalism, and they're so narrow-minded, they don't actually open up to say what's right for me. What makes me feel great? What makes my digestion great? What makes my energy great? What makes my inflammation levels balanced? What makes my all this stuff? How do we optimize it? And if you keep doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting a different result, that's what they say is the definition of insanity. Well, I mean, I'm not calling the person insane, but I'm saying that is not going to produce results. That's kind of an insane process. So I would say, can we get some intellectual flexibility there too, and emotional honesty with ourselves to say, how can we pivot to maybe our preference is to be more plant-based, or maybe we do want to just eat cleaner. Well, how can we do that in a way that works for us? So I think there are polar wars on things. I mean, here every other month, people on the plant-based community warring against the carnivores or the keto community, and it's just nothing new under the sun. This has really been going on for a long time. But to me, it's like, I don't know how anybody could really be like that when they consult patients all day long, because my focus is just to get people healthy. And that's where my allegiance lies, not in a food dogma or dieting rules, but what works for your body and what doesn't. And let's stick with the things that are working for you, and let's avoid the things that aren't, because that goes back to, you can't heal a body you hate. You cannot you can't be so obsessive and food tribal with this sort of stuff. Because if I hung my hat on one way of doing things for everybody, I'd be proven wrong all day long consulting patients online. And you can read that in my books, in Ketotarian and the inflammation spectrum. There's so much customization within those books, so you can find the best version of Ketotarian for you and the best version of the inflammation spectrum tools for you. That's what that's about, because there isn't this hard and fast, overgeneralized, broad sweeping statement when it comes to eat this same set of diet and it's going to work for everybody the same way. It's just oversimplistic.
Absolutely, Dr. Cole. And that's, again, just so well said, that there's really no one-size-fits-all approach, and as much as we want it to be. So, Dr. Cole, as a parting message for anyone who's home right now, anyone who's wondering, what do I do to nourish my mental, physical, emotional, existential health, what would you say to them?
Well, I mean, I think it's something that we said already, but hopefully that message can be brought home on a personal level. Is you can't heal a body you hate. You cannot shame your way into wellness. And I hope that that person that hears that doesn't just hear a talking point or a nice sounding thing that you put on Instagram, but hopefully it's something that you put as a real mantra for your life. Because I see so many people, men and women, but especially women, there is a different levels of shame and disgust even, or regret or self-loathing that goes on, that I really think that undoing that, working on that, it's not a finite thing, but the process of start to healing your relationship with yourself and healing your relationship with food, I feel like can be an amazing catalyst for awesome things in your life. So I think that it's not just about what you're feeding your body with your breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's about what you're feeding your head and your heart and your spirit. And hopefully they can start feeding themselves positive things and things that lift them up and things that fill them up in a way that they are then propelled to eat foods that physiologically make them feel well as well.
Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Cole, and that's such a wonderful way to tie this entire conversation together. It's been a pleasure just listening to you and meeting you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Oh my goodness, thanks so much. Appreciate it.